The morning fog clung to estate like a shroud, obscuring the ancient oak trees that lined the cobblestone driveway. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell pulled her coat as she stepped out of her car, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The Gothic mansion loomed before her, its towering spires piercing through the mist like accusing fingers. Lord Edmund stood at the massive front doors, his usually pristine appearance disheveled. His silver hair was unkempt, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a piece of paper. At 62, he had the bearing of a man accustomed to command, but today he looked utterly defeated. "Inspector Mitchell," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Thank God you're here, she's gone." Sarah approached the Lord with measured steps, her keen eyes already scanning the surroundings. She had worked missing persons cases before, but something about this felt different. The urgency in Lord's voice carried an undertone of fear that went beyond ordinary concern. "When did you last see Lady, my lord?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notepad. The wind picked up, rustling the yellowing leaves that had begun to fall from the ancient trees. "Yesterday evening around 9 o'clock, Edmund replied, running his hand through his hair. "She said she was going to the library to read before bed. It's her routine, you understand, is a creature of habit." His voice cracked slightly on his wife's name. Sarah nodded, making notes. "And you discovered she was missing this morning." "When she didn't come down for breakfast. Never misses breakfast. Never." Edmund's eyes were red-rimmed, whether from lack of sleep or tears, Sarah couldn't tell. "I went to check on her and her bed hadn't been slept in. The library was empty, but—" He trailed off, looking at the paper in his hands with obvious distress. "But what, Lord?" Edmund handed her the paper with shaking fingers. "I found this on her reading chair." Sarah examined the note carefully. The paper was expensive stationery, cream-colored with the family crest embossed at the top. Written in elegant handwriting were the words, "The sins of the past demand payment. She will answer for what was done." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. She looked up at Edmund, whose face had gone pale. "Lord, do you have any idea what this might refer to? What sins? What was done?" Edmund's eyes darted away, and Sarah noticed the telltale signs of someone hiding something. His jaw tightened, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I can't imagine," he stammered. Is a good woman. She's never harmed anyone." Sarah made another note, this time about Edmund's suspicious behavior. In her 15 years as a detective, she had learned that family members often knew more than they initially revealed. "I'll need to search the house, interview the staff, and examine Lady's personal effects," Sarah said. "Is there anyone else staying at the estate currently?" "Our son arrived yesterday afternoon for a visit, and there's Mrs. Henderson, our housekeeper, and James, our groundskeeper. They've both been with us for over 20 years. As if summoned by his name, a young man appeared at the entrance. Was in his early 30s, tall and lean like his father, but with his mother's dark hair and sharp green eyes. He approached them with quick, agitated steps. "Father, any news about Mother?" asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Then, noticing Sarah, he extended his hand. "You must be the detective." Sarah shook his hand, nodding the firm grip and the way his eyes met hers directly. Unlike his father, seemed more composed, though worry lines creased his forehead. "I was just asking your father about the note," Sarah said, showing the paper. Read it quickly, his expression darkening. "This is madness. Who would write such a thing? Mother doesn't have enemies." "That's what I'm here to determine," Sarah replied. "When did you arrive yesterday, mister?" "Around 4 in the afternoon. I had dinner with my parents, and we spent the evening together in the sitting room. Mother excused herself around 9, as father said, to read in the library." Sarah noticed that's account matched his father's perfectly. Too perfectly, perhaps. "Did your mother seem troubled about anything? Did she mention receiving any unusual letters or phone calls recently?" Exchanged a quick glance with his father. There it was again, that look of people sharing a secret. "No, nothing unusual," said, but Sarah detected a slight hesitation in his voice. The sound of footsteps on gravel interrupted them. A woman in her 60s approached from around the side of the house. She was plump and matronly, with graying brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and an apron tied around her waist. "Mrs. Henderson," Edmund called out. "This is Detective Inspector Mitchell. She's here about." Mrs. Henderson's face crumpled with worry. "Oh, my lord, have you found her? I've been beside myself since this morning." Lady would never just disappear without telling someone where she was going. Sarah studied the housekeeper's reaction. The distress seemed genuine, and there was something maternal in the way Mrs. Henderson spoke about Lady. "Mrs. Henderson, when did you last see Lady?" Sarah asked. "Yesterday evening, around 8 o'clock. I brought her a cup of tea in the sitting room where she was with Lord and Master. She seemed in good spirits, laughing at something Master had said about his work in London." "And you didn't see her after that?" "No, ma'am. I finished cleaning up the kitchen and retired to my quarters around 9:30. My room is above the kitchen, on the opposite side of the house from the library." Sarah made more notes, building a timeline in her mind. So far, everyone's stories correlated, but she sensed there were undercurrents she wasn't seeing yet. "Mrs. Henderson, in all your years working here, has Lady ever mentioned feeling threatened by anyone? Any old feuds or disputes?" The housekeeper's eyes widened slightly, and Sarah caught another one of those meaningful glances between the family members. "Well, there was that business years ago," Mrs. Henderson began hesitantly, but Edmund quickly interrupted. "That's ancient history, Mrs. Henderson. Surely it has nothing to do with this." But Sarah was like a bloodhound when she caught a scent. "What business, Mrs. Henderson?" The housekeeper looked nervously between Edmund and, "Perhaps it's not my place to say, Inspector." "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said firmly, "Lady is missing. If there's anything in her past that might be relevant, no matter how distant, I need to know about it." Edmund sighed heavily, looking older than his years. "Very well, but I assure you, Inspector, it couldn't possibly be connected. It was 25 years ago." "Let me be the judge of that," Sarah said. "What happened 25 years ago?" Edmund looked out over the misty grounds, his eyes distant. "There was an accident. A young woman named was involved in the investigation that followed." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the first real lead she had gotten. "What kind of accident, and how was Lady involved?" "Worked here as a maid," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, ignoring Edmund's sharp look. "She was only 19, beautiful girl, full of life. She fell from the East Tower window during a storm." "Fell or was pushed?" Sarah asked bluntly. The silence that followed was deafening. Edmund's face went ashen and stepped closer to his father protectively. "The coroner ruled it an accident," Edmund said finally. "Had been drinking that night. She was upset about something, a personal matter. The window was open, the storm was violent, and she lost her balance." "But there were questions," Mrs. Henderson added softly, earning another sharp look from Edmund. "The family she worked for before us, they weren't satisfied with the ruling. They hired a private investigator, made accusations." Sarah's pen moved rapidly across her notepad. "What kind of accusations?" Edmund's jaw clenched. "They suggested that hadn't committed suicide or fallen accidentally. They thought someone had killed her." "And Lady was involved how?" "Found the body," said quietly. "She was the one who called the police." Sarah looked up from her notes, studying the three faces before her. Each one held secrets, she was certain of that. But which secrets were relevant to Lady's disappearance, and which were just the normal skeletons that every old family kept locked away? The fog was beginning to lift, revealing more of the estate's grounds. In the distance, Sarah could see formal gardens, a small lake, and beyond that, the East Tower that Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. The tower stood apart from the main house, connected by a covered walkway, its windows dark and forbidding. "I'll need to see Lady's room, the library where she was last seen, and this East Tower," Sarah said. "I'll also need a complete list of everyone who has access to the estate." "Of course," Edmund said. "Though I must tell you, Inspector, we have excellent security. The gates are always locked at night, and there are cameras at all the entry points." "Have you checked the security footage from last night?" Edmund looked embarrassed. "I'm afraid I haven't thought to look. This whole situation has been so overwhelming." Sarah made another note. In her experience, the first 24 hours were crucial in missing persons cases. Every minute that passed decreased the chances of finding the person alive and unharmed. As they walked toward the house, Sarah noticed movement in one of the upper windows. A curtain fell back into place quickly, but she was certain someone had been watching them. She made a mental note to ask about other residents or staff members. The interior of a estate was as impressive as the exterior, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and portraits of stern-looking ancestors staring down from the walls. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floors as Edmund led her through the main hallway. "The library is this way," Edmund said, leading her down a corridor lined with more family portraits. The library was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling, a massive fireplace, and several comfortable reading chairs positioned near tall windows. Sarah could see why Lady enjoyed spending her evenings here. It felt peaceful and secure. She examined the chair where the threatening note had been found. The cushions still held an indentation where someone had been sitting, and a book lay open on the side table, Pride and Prejudice by Jane. "Lady was reading this?" Sarah asked. "Yes, she's read it dozens of times. It's her favorite," Edmund replied, his voice heavy with emotion. Sarah carefully examined the area around the chair. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture or displaced objects. Whatever had happened to Lady, it appeared she had left the library willingly or had been taken by someone she trusted. As she continued her examination, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood run cold. The message was from an unknown number and it contained just 5 words: "Stop looking or she dies." She showed the message to Edmund and watching their reactions carefully. Both men appeared genuinely shocked and horrified, but Sarah had learned not to trust appearances entirely. "Inspector," Edmund said, his voice shaking, "whoever has, they're watching us." Sarah looked around the library with new eyes, suddenly aware that they might be under observation at that very moment. The tall windows that had seemed charming moments before now felt exposed and vulnerable. "We need to be very careful how we proceed," she said. "But I want you both to know I don't negotiate with kidnappers and I don't give up on missing persons cases. We're going to find Lady and we're going to find out who's behind this." As she spoke, Sarah's mind was already racing ahead, considering possibilities and planning her next moves. The connection to the case from 25 years ago couldn't be a coincidence. Someone had been waiting, planning, nurturing a grudge for over 2 decades. The question was who? Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell spent the next several hours methodically searching Lady's bedroom while Edmund waited anxiously downstairs. The room was elegantly appointed with antique furniture and family photographs. But what caught Sarah's attention was what wasn't there: Lady's purse, cell phone, and the light jacket she apparently always wore for her evening walks around the estate. Mrs. Henderson knocked softly on the door frame. "Inspector, I thought you should know I found Lady's reading glasses on the kitchen counter this morning. She never goes anywhere without them." Sarah looked up from the dresser drawer she was examining. Could she have been in the kitchen after dinner? "Not likely, ma'am. She doesn't usually come to the kitchen in the evenings. And besides, she had those glasses with her in the sitting room when I brought the tea." This was significant. If Lady had been in the kitchen after 8 p.m., it suggested she had deviated from her normal routine. Sarah made her way downstairs to examine the kitchen, noting the layout and the door that led to the servants' quarters. The kitchen was spotless, clearly Mrs. Henderson's domain. Sarah found the reading glasses exactly where the housekeeper had said, on the counter near a window that looked out toward the gardens. "Mrs. Henderson, this window, does it provide a view of the East Tower?" The housekeeper joined her at the window. "Yes, ma'am. You can see it quite clearly from here, especially at night when there are lights on." Sarah peered through the glass. Even in the daylight, she could see the tower's distinctive silhouette. If someone had been signaling from the tower, Lady might have seen it from this window. "Has anyone been in the East Tower recently?" Mrs. Henderson hesitated. "Well, Master asked about it yesterday afternoon, wanted to know if it was still locked up." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "And is it locked?" "Lord sealed it after the accident 25 years ago, said it brought back too many painful memories, but I know where he keeps the key." "Show me." Mrs. Henderson led Sarah to Lord's study, a dark-paneled room filled with leather-bound books and hunting trophies. She went to an ornate desk and opened the bottom drawer, revealing a small wooden box. "The key should be right here," Mrs. Henderson said, opening the box. Her face went pale. "It's gone." Sarah stared at the empty box, her mind racing. Someone had taken the key to the East Tower, and given interest in it yesterday, he was the obvious suspect. But why would he want access to the place where had died? "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to think carefully. Besides yourself, Lord, and who else might know where this key was kept?" The housekeeper wrung her hands nervously. Well, Lady knew, of course, and James, the groundskeeper, he's been here long enough, but Inspector, you don't think one of us. I'm not making any assumptions yet, Sarah said, though privately she was beginning to form some theories. Let's go find. They located in the conservatory, staring out at the grounds with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. When Sarah approached, she noticed his clothes were different from what he'd been wearing earlier, and there were damp spots on his shoes. Mister, have you been outside this morning? Looked down at his feet, seeming to notice the dampness for the first time. Yes, I couldn't just sit around waiting. I walked the grounds looking for any sign of Mother. Did your walk include the East Tower? The question hit its mark. His face flushed, and he set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. I don't know what you mean. The key to the East Tower is missing from your father's desk. Mrs. Henderson tells me you were asking about the tower yesterday. Was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gardens. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I had to see it. I had to understand what really happened, too. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. She was finally getting to the truth. What do you know about? More than I told you earlier, he admitted. Wasn't just a maid, she was my girlfriend. The revelation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sarah sat down across from, studying his face carefully. You were 19 when she died. Why didn't you mention this before? His hands clenched into fists. Because my parents made me promise never to speak of it. They said it would only cause more pain, more questions, but Inspector, I loved. I would never have hurt her. Tell me what really happened that night. Stood and began packing, his agitation evident. Had been working here for about 6 months. We fell in love, planned to marry, but my parents, they didn't approve. A maid wasn't suitable for the heir to the estate. Sarah made notes, seeing the story taking shape. They forbade the relationship. Worse than that, they threatened to have deported. Her visa status was complicated. They said they'd call immigration if we didn't end things. And did you end things? His voice cracked. Thought we should fight for our love. She said she had information that would change everything, something that would force my parents to accept her. Sarah leaned forward. This was new information, potentially crucial. What kind of information? I don't know. She was mysterious about it, said she needed to be careful. The night she died, she had asked to meet me in the East Tower. She said she was ready to reveal what she knew. But you didn't meet her there. Shook his head miserably. My father locked me in my room, said he knew about our plan and wouldn't allow me to ruin the family name. I heard the storm getting worse, and I was frantic about being out in it. I finally managed to pick the lock around midnight, but by then your mother had already found Spotty. Yes, Mother was hysterical. Father was trying to calm her down and was lying in the courtyard below the tower window. The police arrived, asked their questions, and ruled it an accident. Sarah processed this information carefully. It had damaging information about the family, and she died before she could reveal it. There were several possible scenarios. But the fact that Lady had found the body made her a key witness, and potentially a target if someone wanted to silence her permanently. When you went to the tower this morning, what did you find? Reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. This was hidden behind a loose stone in the tower wall. Must have put it there before whatever happened to her. Sarah unwrapped the cloth to reveal an old-fashioned key and a folded piece of paper. The paper was yellowed with age, and the handwriting was faded but still legible. If something happens to me, the note read, look in the house cellar. The truth about the fire is hidden there, knows more than she's saying. E.V. Sarah's mind reeled, had suspected that Lady was hiding something about a fire. And now, 25 years later, Lady had vanished, leaving behind a note that mentioned sins of the past. What do you know about a fire involving the... Looked genuinely confused. Nothing. I was just a child when died. I don't remember anything about a fire. Sarah needed to find Edmund immediately. If Snote was accurate, he might be the only one who could explain the reference to a fire and its involvement. She found Lord in his study, slumped in his chair with his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red and haunted. Lord, I need you to tell me about a fire involving the family. Edmund's face went ashen. How do you know about that? Left a note. She seemed to think Lady knew something about it. What fire, Lord? Edmund was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, His voice was hollow. "It was 30 years ago, and I were young, newly married. We were at a party at the estate. Richard was a business partner of mine at the time. What happened? There was an electrical fire in the servants' quarters during the party. 3 people died, including Richard's elderly housekeeper and 2 young maids, and I were among the first to notice the smoke." Sarah waited for him to continue, sensing there was more to the story. "The investigation concluded it was an accident, faulty wiring in an old building, but had been in that part of the house earlier in the evening." "Why?" Edmund's hands trembled as he reached for a glass of water on his desk. "She'd been having an affair with Richard. She went to his private study to end things, to tell him she was choosing our marriage over their relationship." The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Sarah needed more details. "Did the fire start near Richard's study?" "Adjacent to it. Always blamed herself, thought maybe she had knocked over a lamp or left a cigarette burning. She was so distraught after the fire that she confessed the affair to me. And somehow found out about this. Was Richard's niece. She came to work for us a few years after Richard died. He never recovered from the guilt over the fire and died of a heart attack 2 years later. I think suspected something and was trying to gather evidence that the fire wasn't an accident." Sarah felt the case crystallizing in her mind. Had been investigating the fire that killed her family's servants, suspecting that it might have been caused by carelessness or even deliberately set to cover up the affair. She had died before she could prove anything, but her notes suggested she had hidden evidence in the house. "Lord, who owns the property now?" Edmund looked up sharply. "It was sold after Richard's death. The buyer was anonymous, purchased through a holding company." Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Found the truth yet, Inspector. Time is running out for Lady." She showed the message to Edmund, whose face crumpled with despair. "They know we're getting close to something. Whoever has, they're connected to the case and the fire." Sarah stood up, her mind made up. "I'm going to the house. Someone has been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to make pay for whatever they think she did." "I'm coming with you," Edmund said, rising unsteadily. "No, you need to stay here in case whoever has tries to contact you directly. But I want you to think, Lord, who else knew about's affair with Richard? Who else might have suspected her involvement in the fire?" As Sarah prepared to leave for the estate, her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, and when she answered, a disguised voice spoke words that made her blood run cold. "Inspector Mitchell, you're very close to the truth, but's life hangs in the balance. Come to the house alone and bring Edmund's confession. He knows what he needs to confess. You have 2 hours." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone. Whoever had Lady was definitely connected to the old fire and's death. They wanted Edmund to confess to something, but what? And why wait 25 years to exact their revenge? As Sarah drove toward the estate, her mind raced through the possibilities. The kidnapper clearly believed, and Edmund were guilty of something more serious than adultery and accidental negligence. But what could justify holding a grudge for so many years? The house came into view as she rounded a bend in the country road. It was smaller than estate, but still impressive, with Gothic revival architecture and extensive grounds. However, where was well-maintained, the property showed signs of neglect, overgrown gardens, peeling paint, and broken shutters. Sarah parked at the front entrance and sat for a moment, studying the building. Somewhere in this house were answers to questions that had haunted multiple families for decades. And somewhere, she hoped, was Lady, still alive and waiting for rescue. As she stepped out of her car, Sarah noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel driveway. Someone else had been here recently, possibly within the last few hours. She checked her weapon and approached the front door, every sense alert for danger. The door was unlocked, swinging open with a loud creak that echoed through the empty hallways. Inside, the house was dark and musty, filled with furniture covered in dust sheets and the smell of decay. "Lady," Sarah called out, her voice echoing in the empty rooms. "This is Detective Inspector Mitchell. If you can hear me, please respond." Silence answered her, but as she moved deeper into the house, she heard a faint sound from somewhere above, a rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on wood. Sarah drew her weapon and started up the main staircase, following the sound to its source. The tapping was coming from a door at the end of the hallway, and when she tried the handle, she found it locked. "Lady, are you in there?" The tapping stopped, replaced by a muffled voice. Inspector, oh, thank God, I'm here, I'm alive, but there's something you need to know. The person who took me, it's not who you think it is. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell worked frantically to pick the old lock while Lady's voice came through the door, strained but coherent. Inspector, you have to listen to me carefully. The person who brought me here, I know them. I've known them for 25 years, but they're not who they appear to be. Lady, I'm almost through this lock. Just keep talking to me. Are you injured? No, I'm not hurt, but Inspector Mrs. Henderson, she's not who she claims to be. Her real name is Maria, she's older sister. Sarah's hands froze on the lock picks. Mrs. Henderson, the loyal housekeeper who had worked for the family for 20 years, was sister. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Lady, are you certain of this? She told me everything last night. How she changed her identity after died, how she got the job to investigate what really happened. She's been watching us, gathering evidence, planning her revenge for 2 decades. Sarah finally managed to open the lock and push the door open to find Lady sitting tied to a chair, but otherwise unharmed. As Sarah worked to untie her bonds, Lady continued her urgent explanation. Maria believes that Edmund and I murdered to keep her quiet about the fire. She thinks we deliberately pushed from the tower window to prevent her from revealing evidence that could have destroyed our family. And did you? Sarah asked bluntly as she freed Lady's hands. Lady rubbed her wrists where the ropes had chafed them. No, Inspector, but I understand why Maria thinks we did. The truth is much more complicated. Sarah helped Lady to her feet, nodding that despite her ordeal, the older woman seemed remarkably composed. Tell me the truth then, all of it. Lady moved to the window and looked out over the neglected grounds. Didn't fall from the tower window, Inspector, and she didn't jump either. Then what happened? She was already dead when I found her in the courtyard. But she didn't fall from the tower, she was moved there to make it look like an accident. Sarah felt her understanding of the case shifting again. Who moved her, and how did she really die? Lady turned back to face Sarah, her expression grim. Died in the cellar of this house, Inspector. She had arranged to meet someone here the night of the storm, someone who had promised to give her the evidence she needed about the fire. Who was she meeting? Richard's son, David. He had survived the fire as a child, but was severely burned and disfigured. After his father died, David became obsessed with proving that the fire wasn't an accident. Sarah's mind raced to keep up with this new information. So and David were working together. Yes, but David wasn't interested in justice. He wanted revenge against everyone he blamed for destroying his family. When came here that night, she thought she was meeting an ally. Instead, she found someone consumed by hatred and paranoia. David killed her. Lady nodded sadly. Discovered that David had been the one setting small fires around the county, practicing for something bigger. She realized he was planning to burn down a state with our family inside. When she threatened to expose him, he killed her in a rage. But why did you cover it up? Why not tell the police the truth? Lady's shoulders sagged with the weight of old guilt. Because I was terrified. David had taken photos of me with Richard during our affair. He threatened to release them and claimed that I had started the original fire deliberately to eliminate the witnesses to our relationship. Edmund and I had both lied to the police about my whereabouts the night of the fire. Sarah began to see the web of lies and half-truths that had trapped everyone involved. So you helped David move Spotty to the tower. David called me that night, hysterical and threatening to burn down our house with inside if I didn't help him. I was so frightened, so desperate to protect my family. We moved to the tower courtyard and staged the scene to look like she had fallen. And David, what happened to him? Lady's voice dropped to a whisper. He died 3 months later in a car accident. I thought it was finally over, but Maria must have suspected the truth all along. Sarah processed this information while helping Lady toward the door. The original fire 30 years ago had been an accident, but it had set in motion a chain of events that led to murder and now Lady's kidnapping. But there were still pieces missing from the puzzle. Lady, if David died 25 years ago, how does Maria plan to prove what really happened? Her evidence would be circumstantial at best. She doesn't need to prove it in court, Inspector. She just wants Edmund and me to suffer the way she's suffered all these years. But there's something else, something that changes everything. They had reached the main staircase when Sarah heard footsteps on the front porch. She motioned for Lady to stay behind her as she drew her weapon and approached the front door. Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway, but this was a different woman from the kindly housekeeper Sarah had met that morning. Her face was hard with determination, and she held a pistol with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "Hello, Inspector Mitchell," Maria said in a voice devoid of warmth. "I see you found my guest." "Maria," Sarah said, keeping her own weapon trained on the woman. "It's over. Put down the gun and we can talk about this." Maria laughed bitterly. "Talk? I've spent 25 years listening to that family's lies. 25 years watching live in comfort while my sister molders in her grave. Death was a tragedy, but Lady didn't kill her." "No," Maria's eyes blazed with fury. "Then why did she help cover it up? Why did she let the world believe my sister committed suicide?" Lady stepped forward despite Sarah's gesture to stay back. "Maria, there's something about death that you don't know, something I've never told anyone." "More lies," Maria spat, but Sarah noticed her gun hand wavering slightly. "No," Lady said firmly. "The truth, the real truth about what happened in the cellar that night." Maria's face showed uncertainty for the first time. "What truth?" Lady took a deep breath. "Didn't die accidentally during a struggle with David. She was murdered, yes, but not by him." Sarah felt another shock wave. "Lady, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I arrived at this house that night was already dead, but David wasn't her killer." Maria lowered her gun slightly. "Then who?" Lady's voice was barely audible. "Edmund, my husband killed your sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah kept her weapon trained on Maria while her mind tried to process this new revelation. If Lady was telling the truth, then Edmund had lied to everyone, including his wife, about his involvement in death. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "Edmund was at that night. He said he locked in his room." "He did," Lady confirmed. "But he left the estate around 11 p.m. after he thought everyone was asleep. He knew about's plan to meet David here, and he came to stop her from revealing whatever evidence she had found." Maria raised her gun again, but this time it was pointed at Lady. "You're lying to protect yourself." "No, Maria. I'm finally telling you the truth because you deserve to know what really happened to your sister." Lady continued her story with painful honesty. "When I arrived here, I found Edmund standing over his body in the cellar. She had fought him, tried to escape, but he was stronger. He told me he had just meant to frighten her, to make her leave town quietly. But when she threatened to destroy our family, he lost control." Sarah could see Maria struggling with this information. The woman had spent over 2 decades believing one version of events, and now everything was being turned upside down. "If this is true," Maria said slowly, "then why did you help him? Why protect a murderer?" Lady's composure finally cracked, and tears began flowing down her cheeks. "Because I was a coward. Because I chose my family's reputation over justice for your sister. Because Edmund convinced me that turning him in would destroy his life as well as ours." "So you both moved his body to the tower?" "Yes, and we let everyone believe she had committed suicide rather than face the consequences of what Edmund had done." Maria's gun hand was shaking now, and Sarah could see the internal war being fought on her face. 25 years of hatred and the desire for revenge were battling against the shock of learning that her assumptions had been wrong. "Maria," Sarah said carefully, "I know this is a lot to process, but killing Lady won't bring back. Let me help you get the justice your sister deserves." "Justice?" Maria laughed harshly. "Edmund is probably destroying evidence as we speak. By the time we get back to, there won't be anything left to prove what he did." Lady spoke up unexpectedly. "Actually, there is proof, evidence that Edmund doesn't know exists." Both Sarah and Maria stared at her. "The night died, she was wearing a locket that had belonged to our mother. In her final moments, she managed to scratch Edmund's initials into the back of it, EB for Edmund. I found the locket when we moved her body, and I've kept it hidden all these years." Sarah felt a surge of hope. Physical evidence could make the case against Edmund, assuming Lady wasn't lying about its existence. "Where is this locket?" Sarah asked. "Hidden in a safety deposit box in London. I've kept the key all these years, telling myself it was insurance in case Edmund ever tried to blame me for what happened." Maria was staring at Lady with a mixture of hatred and confusion. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not take this secret to your grave? Lady met Maria's gaze steadily. Because I've lived with this guilt for 25 years, and it's destroyed me slowly, piece by piece. Because you've suffered long enough without knowing the truth, and because deserves to have her real killer face justice. Sarah sensed that this was the crucial moment. Maria had the power to end this cycle of violence and revenge, or to perpetuate it by killing Lady. The choice would define not just the outcome of this case, but the rest of Maria's life. Maria, Sarah said gently, you've dedicated half your life to finding the truth about death. Now you have it. Don't let Edmund's crime turn you into a killer too. Maria stood frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, slowly, she lowered the gun and let it fall from her fingers to clatter on the wooden floor. I want to see this locket, she said through tears. I want proof that my sister didn't die for nothing. Sarah holstered her weapon and moved to secure Maria's gun. We'll get the proof, Maria, and Edmund will face justice for what he did to. As Sarah called for backup and an ambulance to check on Lady, she reflected on the complex web of lies, guilt, and revenge that had finally been unraveled. But the case wasn't over yet. Edmund was still free at estate, and Sarah had no idea how he would react when he learned that his 25-year-old secret was about to be exposed. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell arrived back at estate with Lady and Maria in custody, though Maria was cooperating fully with the investigation. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the estate grounds as police vehicles surrounded the mansion. Edmund stood at the front entrance, his face pale but defiant as he watched them approach. Was beside him, confusion evident in his expression as he saw his mother emerge from Sarah's vehicle unharmed. Called out, running toward her, "Thank God you're safe," we thought. Lady embraced her son, but her eyes remained fixed on her husband. Edmund's gaze darted between his wife and Maria, and Sarah could see the moment when recognition dawned on his features. "Mrs. Henderson," he said slowly, his voice strangely calm. "Or should I say Maria?" Maria stepped forward, no longer hiding behind the persona she had maintained for 20 years. "Hello, Edmund. Did you really think I would never find out what you did to my sister?" Edmund's composure cracked slightly, but he maintained his dignity. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah intervened before the confrontation could escalate. "Lord, you're under arrest for the murder of. You have the right to remain silent." Murder stepped back from his parents in shock. "What are you talking about? His death was ruled an accident." Edmund's facade finally crumbled completely. His shoulders sagged, and 25 years of carefully maintained lies seemed to drain out of him all at once. He said quietly, "There are things you don't understand, things I did to protect our family." "What things, Father?" Lady moved to stand beside her husband, and for the first time since the investigation began, Sarah saw them as the united couple they had once been. "Edmund killed," Lady said gently, "and I helped him cover it up." The next few minutes passed in a blur of shocked reactions and tearful confessions. Demanded explanations, Maria wept for the sister she had lost, and Edmund finally told the complete truth about that night 25 years ago. "Had discovered evidence that could have destroyed our family's reputation," Edmund explained as Sarah's colleagues took him into custody. "Not just about affair, but about business dealings that were questionable. When I went to reason with her that night, she laughed at me, said she would expose everything unless I agreed to let her marry." "So you killed her," Maria said, her voice hollow with grief. Edmund nodded slowly. "I didn't plan to, I just wanted to frighten her, but she fought back and I lost control. When it was over, I called and told her there had been an accident." Sarah listened to the confession while making detailed notes. The case that had seemed so complex was actually tragically simple, a powerful man who had killed to protect his secrets and position. "The business about David planning revenge," Sarah said to Lady, "that was all fabricated." Lady nodded miserably. "Edmund needed a story that would explain death and make me complicit in covering it up. He convinced me that if the truth came out, we would both be ruined and would suffer for our crimes." Stood apart from his parents, struggling to process the revelation that his entire life had been built on lies and murder. "All these years, I blamed myself for death. I thought if I had been able to meet her that night, she would still be alive." Maria said softly, approaching the young man who had once been her sister's beloved. "Talked about you constantly. She loved you more than anything. She would never want you to blame yourself for what happened to her. The emotional reunion between and Maria was interrupted by the arrival of more police vehicles. Sarah's superior, Chief Inspector Williams, had come personally to oversee the arrest of such a prominent figure. "Inspector Mitchell," Williams said, pulling Sarah aside, "this is going to be a high-profile case. Are you confident in the evidence?" Sarah nodded. "Lady has agreed to testify against her husband, and she claims there's physical evidence, a locket with Edmund's initials scratched into it by before she died. And the kidnapping charges against Maria." Sarah glanced over at Maria, who was talking quietly with about his memories of. "Given the circumstances and her cooperation, I recommend reduced charges. She was seeking justice for her murdered sister, even if her methods were wrong." Chief Inspector Williams nodded. "Write up your recommendations. This case will probably make national headlines once the story gets out." As the police began processing the crime scene and taking statements, Sarah found herself reflecting on the tragic chain of events that had unfolded over the past 24 hours. A 30-year-old fire had led to an affair, which led to a murder, which led to 25 years of deception and revenge. Lady approached Sarah as Edmund was being led to the police car. "Inspector, I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that not a day has passed without my thinking about. The guilt has been eating away at me for decades." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Sarah asked. "Fear, cowardice. And by the time I realized how wrong we had been, too much time had passed. I convinced myself that bringing Edmund down wouldn't bring back." Sarah studied Lady's face, seeing genuine remorse there. "You'll need to testify against your husband. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, it's time for the truth to come out, no matter what it costs." As the day turned to evening, Sarah completed her paperwork at the estate while the forensics team searched for additional evidence. The case was solid. Edmund's confession, Lady's testimony, and the promised physical evidence would be enough to secure a conviction. Found Sarah as she was preparing to leave. "Inspector, I wanted to thank you for finding the truth, even though it's not what I expected or wanted to hear." "Truth is often painful, mister, but it's better than living with lies." Nodded sadly. "I've been thinking about all day, about the life we might have had together if my father hadn't been so concerned with protecting the family reputation." "What will you do now?" "I don't know. Everything I thought I knew about my family has turned out to be false. I suppose I'll have to figure out who I really am without all the lies." Sarah left estate as the last police vehicles were departing. Maria had been released on bail, and despite the charges she faced for kidnapping, Sarah suspected she would receive a suspended sentence given the circumstances. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in the courtroom as Lord Edmund pleaded guilty to the murder of. The physical evidence, the locket with Edmund's initials, had been recovered from the London safety deposit box exactly where Lady said it would be. In her victim impact statement, Maria spoke eloquently about her sister's dreams and the 25 years of uncertainty and pain that the family's lies had caused. "Was only 19 when she died," Maria said, her voice steady despite her tears. "She had her whole life ahead of her. She wanted to marry, to have children, to make a difference in the world. Instead, she died alone and afraid in a basement, murdered by a man who cared more about his reputation than her life." Edmund was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Lady received a suspended sentence for her role in covering up the crime, but she would have to live with the knowledge that her actions had prevented justice for over 2 decades. Used his inheritance to establish a foundation for immigrant workers' rights in memory. He and Maria developed an unlikely friendship based on their shared grief and their determination to honor his legacy. Sarah often thought about the case in the months that followed. It had taught her that secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of demanding their due. The truth about death had taken 25 years to emerge, but it had emerged nonetheless. The estate was sold 6 months after Edmund's conviction. Couldn't bear to live in the place where so many lies had been told and so much pain had been hidden. The new owners, a young family with small children, brought laughter and light back to the old mansion. Lady moved to a small cottage in the countryside, where she spent her remaining years writing letters to his family and volunteering at organizations that helped young immigrants. She never, and according to those who knew her, she never forgave herself for the choice she made that stormy night 25 years ago. Maria returned to her real name and her real life. She opened a small bakery in the town near, using recipes that had learned from their grandmother. On the anniversary of death each year, Maria would visit her sister's grave and tell her about the justice that had finally been served. The case of Lady's disappearance officially closed with Edmund's conviction. But for Sarah, it remained one of the most complex and emotionally difficult investigations of her career. It had shown her how one moment of violence could ripple through generations, affecting innocent people in ways that the original perpetrator never intended. Years later, when Sarah was training new detectives, she would often use the case as an example of how patience, attention to detail, and the willingness to look beyond the obvious suspects could eventually uncover even the most carefully hidden truths. Remember, she would tell her students, justice delayed is not always justice. Sometimes it just means that the truth is more complicated than anyone realized. The East Tower was eventually demolished by the new owners, who felt that it cast too dark a shadow over their children's playground. But local residents claimed that on stormy nights, when the wind was particularly fierce, you could still hear the sound of someone tapping on wood, as if a long-dead young woman was still trying to communicate the truth about her untimely death. Sarah never gave much credence to ghost stories, but she understood why people needed to believe that spirit had finally found peace. After 25 years of lies and cover-ups, the truth had finally set everyone free, the living and the dead alike. The investigation had taken less than 24 hours to solve, but the crimes it uncovered had been 25 years in the making. In the end, Sarah reflected, justice might sometimes be slow, but it was often more thorough than anyone expected. The truth about murder had emerged not because of brilliant detective work, but because the people involved in covering it up could no longer bear the weight of their secrets. As Sarah drove away from the courthouse after Edmund's sentencing, she made a mental note to check on and Maria in a few months. Both of them had been forever changed by the revelation of the truth, and she wanted to make sure they were finding healthy ways to move forward with their lives. The case had reminded her why she had become a detective in the first place, not just to solve crimes, but to help people find closure and peace. Sometimes that meant arresting the guilty party, and sometimes it meant simply ensuring that the truth was finally told. In the end, that was exactly what had happened with the vanishing of Lady and the long-hidden murder of. The truth had been told, justice had been served, and the living could finally begin to heal from wounds that had been festering for far too long.